one of the fundamental tenets of globalism is the idea that everything needs to be able to move around, right? Capital, money, and people. And we expected that there would be this thing called labor mobility. And we would expect that there would be labor mobility not only internationally to go where the opportunities are, but domestically. That if your Midwestern town was destroyed through globalization and offshoring of manufacturing, that you would just pack up your family and drive to the new town and set up shop in the new economy or whatever. And we just didn't see that happen, right? And that's how you get the carving out. Labor mobility. Is this a real thing? Is this something that you can address? Is this something that we can put, the final sort of death blow to this idea that people get up and move around just whenever the jobs demand it?
Yeah, labor mobility is a myth, and I can prove it with two numbers, and the numbers are 3 and 18. So to start with number 3, according to the United Nations, only 3% of the human race lives in a country other than the one in which it was born. 3%, 90% of all people on Earth will live and die in the same country they're born in. Now, in countries with lots of immigrants, like the U.S., the number of foreign-born citizens goes up to 10, 15%. That still means 85% of Americans and Canadians and Europeans are born and will live and die in the U.S. or Canada or Europe. So we say America is a country of immigration. No, it's actually a country of natives, with about 15% being immigrant. Now, we're descendants of immigrants, all of us one way or the other. So the other number is 18. According to the New York Times, the average American, and they use women for this because women live longer, the average American lives 18 miles from her mother. Now, think about that. So whenever I have a college-educated audience, I ask them to raise their hands. Do you live 18 miles from your mother? No. No, college-educated professionals are nomads. I belong to that class. I belong to the managerial elite. We go wherever our careers take us. Most working-class Americans do not. There's an enormous number of working-class Americans, not only who live in the same state they were born in, but they live in the same city they were born in. Now, why does this matter for globalization? Well, there's an inherent class conflict. And the reason is very simple. Labor is geographically immobile, not only among nations, but among regions within a nation. Capital is mobile, right? The corporation can move the factory from the Midwest to South China. The Midwesterners cannot move to South China to get jobs, right? So you have a situation where naturally the working class majority is going to want restrictions on trade. It's also going to want some restrictions on immigration. You don't have to have zero immigration, but the attitudes towards immigration also fall along class lines. Those who see themselves as competitors with immigrants tend to be more opposed to it than those who see them as complements of immigrants or employers of immigrants. So we talk about this in these kind of abstract, academic theoretical terms, but at the end of the day, there is no scientific theoretical answer. It depends on, where you stand depends on where you sit. So, both the employers and the employees can agree that, unskilled immigration often lowers wages of unskilled workers. From the consumer's point of view, the employer's point of view, that's good, right? More profits, lower prices. From the worker's point of view, that's bad. Well, who is right? Well, it depends on whose side you take.
Indeed it does. Indeed it does. So labor mobility is a myth. And in fact, when you incorporate globalization and labor mobility fails, it actually makes things worse for the people that you were ostensibly, allegedly, theoretically trying to benefit. And what you get is hollowed out of towns and communities where in the vacuum that was once filled by industry and community now is filled with fentanyl, drug addiction, homelessness, joblessness, poverty, and all kinds of things that we all collectively agree are a bad thing. Yet we basically made it happen inside the United States on purpose. And the reason that we did that is because the corporate uniparty that had fused with the neoliberals, as really well documented in Matt Stoller's book Goliath, they decided to engage in an arbitrage where they traded low wages for profits instead of seeking higher levels of productivity. What are the long-term ramifications of that profit generation through labor arbitrage versus productivity growth?
Well, that's the central question, because what made the U.S. and other industrial countries rich is not capitalism in general. It's industrial capitalism. That is, it is capitalists who invested in labor-saving, resource-conserving, energy-using technology so that you could use machines to do things that humans and animals had done in the past. There are all kinds of other capitalism. There's, there's condo flipping capitalism, right? There's dog race capitalism. There's flea market capitalism. The genius of industrial capitalism, and we should really say the industrial mixed economy, because the only successful industrial capitalist countries have a mixture of private sector dynamism, of a good state intervention where necessary, social safety net, and so on. But let's call it industrial capitalism. What that did was it created new wealth that did not exist before, and you have to have new wealth before you can share the wealth. So I'm very in favor of growth and industrial dynamism. If you have a kind of flea market capitalism, people are trading things back and forth, but nothing new is being created, right? If you have companies doing stock buybacks, the money, they're buying back their own stocks to boost the stock price. That is not going into laboratory research. It's not going into new production facilities. It's not doing anything that increases productivity. So there's a tendency to talk about this in terms of jobs. But at the end of the day, with the exception of financial panics, there has never been mass unemployment from new technology. Generally, banking crises cause mass unemployment temporarily. But new inventions don't. People find new jobs. New wealth is generated. The danger is that if you lose the dynamic industrial parts of your economy, then you become a completely unproductive economy, where, like many poor countries, we call them developing, but some of them are not developing. So you can have a country that has a flourishing tourism sector, flourishing natural resources, flourishing mining, flourishing banking and business sector in the cities, but it's going to be a poor country compared to one that has a dynamic, advanced manufacturing sector, even if the advanced manufacturing only employs a minority of people in the country.
Yes. Arbitrage, labor arbitrage, swapping out an expensive employee for a cheap one. That's like a drug. That's like taking a drug to boost your profits. It's not sustainable in the long run. And I imagine in the super ultra mega long run, once the whole world could get into this whole system, then finally they'd be forced into seeking out productivity to raise profits rather than labor arbitrage. But before we get to there, everybody in the world will have their own towns hollowed out. I went to George Mason University. I was trained as a libertarian economist. I have an economics degree from there. Then I went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service, where I got the globalist perspective. I later realized that it was actually combined, the neoliberal libertarian viewpoint combined with the globalist viewpoint. They called it the Washington consensus. They even called it the neoliberal consensus, without one hint of irony or one hint of it being like some bad thing. And so as I begin to really explore these issues with folks like yourself and others, experts in their field, I'm less inclined to believe that the libertarianism of my youth, the idealistic notion that we can just let everybody do their own thing and strong, heavy bias towards private market solutions for problems. That's fading for me. It's fading for me, but it's not fading for everybody else out there. So, for example, we talked about how immigration drives down the wages of people in the United States. The libertarians will tell you that if you bring in immigration, you're going to drive up aggregate demand. And if you drive up aggregate demand, then you're going to actually benefit everybody else. Matt Iglesias wants to see 1 billion, Americans import all kinds of people. Alex Narestra, I can't pronounce his name, from the think tanks down here, constantly harping on libertarianism and immigration and open borders and whatnot. It makes me even think now about comparative advantage as well. So if you want to address Matt Iglesias, 1 billion people coming to the U.S. to drive up aggregate demand in order to spread the benefit to everyone, please do. I also want to talk about comparative advantage and if that's something that still lives today.
Well, let's start with the aggregate demand. It depends on what statistic you're trying to maximize. Overall GDP, gross domestic product, or per capita productivity. Okay, GDP, and this is where a lot of people make mistakes, even very intelligent people, as you know. GDP is it's actually workforce hours times labor productivity, right? That results in output. You can have absolutely stagnant productivity per worker and triple your GDP by tripling your population, right? So, yeah, it's true. The U.S. could have a vastly greater GDP if we imported 1 billion people. Why stop there? Why not 3 billion? Why not 5 billion? GDP would be bigger. If you want to increase productivity per capita, that's a totally different question.